the Honourable Professor Martin. Thank you, CEDA, for inviting me today. I'm truly delighted to contribute to this annual public policy discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, the title of my intervention is Where the European Union is post-GFC. I think it's a daunting task. I will use the 15 minutes I have to be as much as comprehensive, as clear as possible. I will focus on two issues. First one is the European Union economic policy strategy to tackle the crisis when it comes from Wall Street to Europe in 2008-2009. Secondly, to look at the European Union outlooks and risk, also taking into consideration the recent political election in Europe, and finally, the EU-Australia relation. So let me come to the first point, the EU strategy to tackle the crisis. It's important to say that GFC was, without no doubt, the biggest we have had to face since the European integration project began, and the first for the euro area. The crisis resulted on one side in a legacy of economic, financial, and social damages, and in a recognition of the lack of an effective policy toolkit to respond. On the other side, it prompted a remarkable wave of EU-wide reforms, ultimately underpinning what has become a gradually strengthening, broad-based recovery in more strong Europe. If we have to summarize what has been our strategy, we can say that our strategy has been based on four pillars. First, ensuring the financial stability and restoring the normal lending to the economy, basically ending the financial panic. You might remember the phrase of President of the ECB, Mario Draghi, in July 2012, to do whatever it takes to preserve the Europe. Correctly, the Financial Times called these three words of Mario Draghi as the most three important words said by an Italian since Giulio Cesar in Veni Vidi Vidi in the Bello Gallico. And that July was really the turning point for moving the crisis, because the months before, in June 2012, the European heads of state and government decided to create the banking union. I will come back on this. So this initial, what we call firefighting phase of the responses, which was the period 2010-2012, became a learning experience, sometimes appeared uncoordinated, but resulted in a systemic change, such as the creation of the permanent firewall, called the European Stability Mechanism, which was complemented at that time by the ECB intervention in government bond markets to address the severe distortion and long-term refinancing operation aimed at improving bank lending. The second part of our strategy has been making our economies more resilient, more competitive, through structural reform and gradual and growth-friendly fiscal consolidation. And these reforms are working. If we look at the European countries who, due to the crisis, entered into economic adjustment program, we can see that Ireland exited the program in 2013, December 2013, Spain in January 2014, Portugal in May 2014. Of course, this news generates less interest or less media attraction compared when this program were launched. And Greece has returned to sell its own debt recently, while the situation in Cyprus has been stabilized. And the public finances has also been repaired. If you look at two key numbers, we see the deficit to GDP ratio has decreased. We are now at 2.5 of the European GDP, both for the EU and the Eurozone. And the level of public debt, while still high, is stabilizing. The forecasts are 89.5% of European GDP to drop to 89.2% of the GDP in 2015. So the third part of this strategy has been to collectively try to cushion as much as possible the short-term cost of the adjustment and to provide growth-friendly policies. The ECB, again, as it played its part through monetary policy, also through non-standard measures. As been recalled before, only on June the 5th, the Governing Council of the ECB announced a whole set of new measures aiming at providing additionally monetary policy accommodation and to support lending to the real economy. Separately, and at the same time, the national government, both individually and as a union, took measures to boost the credit to the economy, to support employment, especially for young people, to create new trade and innovation and research opportunities. If we look at the labor sector, the European Union adopted in 2012 a compact for growth and jobs to improve the resilience of the labor market and address youth unemployment. Between April 2013 to April 2014, 450,000 new jobs has been added in the youth market. It is a very small number, but gives the sense of the new trend. If we look at the trade agenda, the European Union launched basically the biggest negotiation with the United States, the TTIP, and with Japan, as well as initiating in November last year an EU-China investment agreement. During this same year, we closed a very successful FTAs with Korea in October 2010, and in October last year with Canada. If you look at the European budget, which is a 7 years budget, is 2014-2020, substantial resources were allocated to infrastructure, education, research, and innovation, like the project Horizon 2020. We are pleased to say that it is the world's largest program funded with 79 billion euro. The fourth and final pillar of our strategy has been to strengthening the European economic and monetary union. This turning point from a firefighting phase, which was, as I said, 2010-2012, happened in June 2012. So the leader was confident enough to have brought this situation under control and to launch the next steps, to tackle the challenges, to tackle the weakness of the euro governments. And 2 years later, decisive steps has been taken, in particular with the creation of the banking union. The banking union allow for the ECB in Frankfurt to apply on a European scale the same EU-wide rule book for nearly 6,000 banks in the euro area, and should a bank fail, we have a single resolution mechanism, thereby breaking the sovereign banking link, which has been one of the main weaknesses in the euro crisis, and paving the way for greater long-term stability. Aside from the banking union, we launched the European semester, which is a yearly discussion among member states and the Commission among member states on the project of each of the 28 member states have to provide. This country-specific recommendation reveal increasingly a shift, an emphasis from an urgent problem caused by the crisis to a sustainable growth and employment. And these specific recommendations are no other than reducing the tax burden of labor, modernize public employment services with special focus on long-term unemployed, undertake structural reform in the services sector, energy, transport infrastructure, R&D, competition law. I think this recommendation also resonate in the Australian context. So what has been yielded from this economic strategy as developed in these 4 phases that I explained? If we have to synthesize, the economic outlook is improving, recovery is broadening and becoming self-sustainable, fiscal consolidation is showing results, labor markets timidly improving, price pressure remain low, and downside risks remain. But let's be a little bit in detail. The growth has returned. The EU economy has emerged from recession in 2013, and we have achieved 4 quarters of modest growth since then. This is confirmed by the European Commission spring forecast released last month, which foresee the EU economy to grow by 1.6% in 2014, and 2,000% in 2015, when we have, in a reassuring sign of a broad-based recovery, all 28 EU economies are expected to be growing again as domestic demand comes back to complement the current expansion driven mainly by next export. Labor market conditions are set to timidly and gradually improve, although unemployment is forecast to remain dramatically high, at above 10% this year and next, given the usual lag response of employment to change in output. Inflation has been recalled before, a topical subject following last month's further reduction in a key ECB interest rate, continues to reflect excess capacity in the economy, and the latest figure for May 2014 indicates a low annual rate of 0.6% on a yearly basis. This is, however, expected to pick up over the coming quarter as the recovery progresses and is forecast at 1% this year and 1.5% in 2015. Looking ahead, there remain downside risks to the growth outlook stemming from uncertainty within the external environment, AM vulnerabilities, geopolitical tension in many parts of the world, including in Eastern Europe, but also from internal political difficulties within the Europe. It is not difficult to realize that as the recovery advances and the existential threat to the Eurozone fade away, the political pressure for implementing substantial but unpopular reform decrease. And this represents a political challenge for European leaders and for the next cycle of European institutions over the coming 5 years. In this regard, the recent European Parliament election in Europe have revealed a clear political discontent in part of the European electorate in the wake of the crisis. However, we should not confuse the real request for change of policy with a very vocal, albeit limited, call for a structural alteration of the European project as such. If we look at the number in the European Parliament, we see the very clear majority of the members of the European Parliament, 75%, have a clear pro-EU stance, as do the 28 member state governments. So legislating will be perfectly possible in the new parliament. There will be no legislative gridlock in Europe. Of course, it will be the task of the European leader to present credible, realizable initiative for the new EU Commission and the Parliament, addressing the requests of the European citizens for more growth and more jobs. If we have to look at the EU outlook within the globe and within the relation with Australia, I think it's important to look at considering that the EU as a 28 bloc is the world's biggest single market, a largest trader of goods and services. So it's 16% of world import and exports. And as we speak, the G20 discussion in Melbourne or the Sherpa highlight the interdependence of our economies as we develop our respective growth strategy. The relation between the EU and Australia are broad and strong. If you look at the numbers, the Australian statistics recently published recall the EU is bilateral trade in goods and services is $79 Australian billion, marking the EU as Australia's second largest trading partner after China and the largest trading partner in services. At the end of 2013, the EU was also the leading investment partner in this country, with the two-way investment stocks at almost 1.2 trillion Australian dollars. Of course, this investment and associated technologies and innovation are not only boosting our bilateral trade, but also helping Australia to reap the benefits of the Asian growth story. The fact that Australia is open for business resonates very clearly and positively in Europe. Europe has never been closed for business. More generally, the European Union and Australia are like-minded partners. We are both a rule-based economy. We are both a value-based society with a strong relationship built on a common cultural heritage. The government-to-government relations are very strong and robust. Prime Minister Abbott was early this month in Europe. The Vice President of the European Commission was last week in Sydney and Melbourne for meeting with the senior Australian government. There's a G20 track of work, and the European leaders will come to Brisbane in November this year. If we look briefly at the building block of this relation, we see that on G20, the EU is firmly committed to fulfill the objective of 2% growth of world GDP in the next 5 years, as agreed by the finance minister last February. On foreign and security policy, we hold regular talks, and we're working increasingly in crucial area in the UN, in other international fora, in Middle East, in many other parts of the world. We have a strong cooperation on development and humanitarian aid. We are working on a participation framework agreement in case of Australia, which will allow Australia to participate in civilian and military crisis management mission led by you. On climate change, we continue to work together to find solutions. And on top of this, we are at an advanced stage of negotiation for an EU-Australia framework agreement, and the new Commission will be ready to listen to the Australian government on potential feasibility of an FTA with the European Union. Ladies and gentlemen, my conclusion very quickly. This Thursday, the European leaders will commemorate the outbreak of the First World War, so the Sarajevo shooting on 28 June 1914, with a ceremony in Ypres in Belgium. And similar events are being held in Australia during the 100th anniversary, which serve to remind ourselves in Europe how much Australia has always invested in European freedom and how these events ultimately led to the creation of the European Union as a project of peace and prosperity. However, just as the EU has expanded from 6 founding members to now comprise 28 countries with a population of over 500 million people, accounting for almost 1/4 of global GDP, this project remains a work in progress. Building on the economic reform that have been enacted since the GFC, further work is needed to complete the design of the economic and monetary union, with a consideration also for an even closer political union, all of which will eventually need to rest on the democratic consensus around what needs to be done. In the recent word of the outgoing European Commission President, I quote, "There is a lot to build on from here, a unique project, a necessary project, a project to be proud of." Thank you.